Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, a story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 6. This time the answer was prompt, unmistakable. I cannot explain to you what it was, nor how it came to me, for there was no sound. I saw absolutely nothing but the empty night. There was no moon, but somewhere off there over the little valley far off the darkness was troubled. That me went out upon my thought, out from the mission garden, out over the valley, calling for her, searching for her, found I don't know what, but found a resting place, a companion. 3 times since then I have gone to the mission garden at night. Last night was the 3rd time. He paused, his eyes shining with excitement. Presley leaned forward toward him, motionless with intense absorption. Well, and last night, he prompted. The enemy stirred in his seat. His glance fell. He drummed an instant upon the table. Last night, he answered, there was a change. The answer was, he drew a deep breath, nearer. Are you sure? The other smiled with absolute certainty. It was not that I found the answer sooner, easier. I could not be mistaken. No, that which has troubled the darkness, that which has entered into the empty night, is coming nearer to me, physically nearer, actually nearer. His voice sank again. His face, like the face of younger prophets, the seers, took on a half-inspired expression. He looked vaguely before him with unseeing eyes. Suppose, he murmured, suppose I stand there under the pear trees at night and call her again and again, and each time the answer comes nearer and nearer, and I wait until the last one night, the supreme night of all, she... Suddenly the tension broke. With a sharp cry and a violent, uncertain gesture of the hand, the enemy came to himself. Oh, he exclaimed, what is it? Do I dare? What does it mean? There are times when it appalls me, and there are times when it thrills me with a sweetness and a happiness that I have not known since she died. The vagueness of it. How can I explain it to you? This that happens when I call to her across the night, that faint, far-off, unseen tremble in the darkness, that intangible, scarcely perceptible stir. Something neither heard nor seen, appealing to a sixth sense only. Listen, it is something like this. On King Sabe all last week, we have been seeding the earth. The grain is there now under the earth, buried in the dark, in the black stillness under the clods. Can you imagine the very first little quiver of life that the grain of wheat must feel after it is sown, when it answers to the call of the sun down there in the dark of the earth, blind, deaf? The very first stir from the inert, long before any physical change has occurred, long before the microscope could discover the slightest change, when the shell first tightens with the first faint premonition of life. Well, it is something as elusive as that. He paused again, dreaming, lost in a reverie, and just above a whisper murmured, that which thou sowest is not quickened except it die. And she, Angel, died. You could not have been mistaken, said Presley. You were sure that there was something? Imagination can do so much, and the influence of the surroundings was strong. How impossible it would be that anything should happen. And you say you heard nothing, saw nothing. I believe, answered Vanity, in a sixth sense, or rather a whole system of other unnamed senses beyond the reach of our understanding. People who live much alone and close to nature experience a sensation of it. Perhaps it is something fundamental that we share with plants and animals. The same thing that sends the birds south long before the first colds, the same thing that makes the grain of wheat struggle up to meet the sun. And this sense never deceives. You may see wrong, hear wrong, but once touch this sixth sense and it acts with absolute fidelity, you are certain. No, I hear nothing in the mission garden. I see nothing. Nothing touches me, but I am certain for all that. Presley hesitated for a moment. Then he asked, "Shall you go back to the garden again, make the test again?" "I don't know." "Strange enough," commented Presley, wondering. Vanamy sank back in his chair, his eyes growing vacant again. "Strange enough," he murmured. There was a long silence. Neither spoke nor moved. There in that moribund ancient town, wrapped in its siesta, flagellated with heat, deserted, ignored, baking in a noonday silence, these two strange men, the one a poet by nature, the other by training, both out of tune with their world, dreamers, introspective, morbid, lost and unfamiliar at the end of the century time, searched for a sign, groping and baffled amidst the perplexing obscurity of the delusion, sat over empty wine glasses, silent with the pervading silence that surrounded them, hearing only the cooing of doves and the drone of bees, a quiet so profound that at length they could plainly distinguish at intervals the puffing and coughing of a locomotive switching cars in the station yard off Bonneville. It was, no doubt, this jarring sound that at length roused Presley from his lethargy. The two friends rose, solitary, very sleepily came forward. They paid for the luncheon, and stepping out into the heat and glare of the streets of the town, passed on through it, and took the road that led northward across a corner of Dyke's hop fields. They were bound for the hills in the northeastern corner of Quinsabe. It was the same walk which Presley had taken on the previous occasion when he had first met Vanamy herding the sheep. This encompassing detour around the whole countryside was a favorite pastime of his, and he was anxious that Vanamy should share his pleasure in it. But soon after leaving Guadalajara, they found themselves upon the land that Dyke had bought and upon which he was to raise his famous crop of hops. Dyke's house was close at hand, a very pleasant little cottage painted white, with green blinds and deep porches, while near it, and yet in process of construction, were two great storehouses and a drying and curing house where the hops were to be stored and treated. All about were evidences that the former engineer had already been hard at work. The ground had been put in readiness to receive the crop, and a bewildering, innumerable multitude of poles, connected with a maze of wire and twine, had been set out. Farther on, at a turn of the road, they came upon Dyke himself driving a farm wagon loaded with more poles. He was in his shirt sleeves, his massive hairy arms bare to the elbow, glistening with sweat, red with heat. In his bell-like, rumbling voice, he was calling to his foreman and a boy at work in stringing the poles together. At sight of Presley and Vanamy, he hailed them jovially, addressing them as boys and insisting that they should get into the wagon with him and drive to the house for a glass of beer. His mother had only the day before returned from Marysville, where she had been looking up a seminary for the little Tad. She would be delighted to see the two boys. Besides, Vanamy must see how the little Tad had grown since he last set eyes on her. Wouldn't know her for the same little girl. And the beer had been on ice since morning. Presley and Vanamy could not well refuse. They climbed into the wagon and jolted over the uneven ground, through the bare forest of hop poles to the house. Inside they found Mrs. Dyke, an old lady, with a very gentle face, who wore a cap and a very old-fashioned gown with hoop skirts, dusting the whatnot in a corner of the parlor. The two men were presented, and the beer was had from off the ice. "Mother," said Dyke, as he wiped the froth from his great blond beard, "ain't Sid anywheres about? I want Mr. Vanamy to see how she has grown. Smartest little tad in Tulare County, boys, can recite the whole of Snowbound end to end without skipping or looking at the book. Maybe you don't believe that. Mother, ain't I right? Without skipping a line, hey?" Mrs. Dyke nodded to say that it was so, but explained that Sydney was in Guadalajara. In putting on her new slippers for the first time the morning before, she had found a dime in the toe of one of them, and had had the whole house by the ears ever since till she could spend it. "Was it for licorice? To make her licorice water?" inquired Dyke gravely. "Yes," said Mrs. Dyke. "I made her tell me what she was going to get before she went, and it was licorice." Dyke, though his mother protested that he was foolish and that Presley and Vanamy had no great interest in young ones, insisted upon showing the visitors Sydney's copybooks. They were monuments of laborious, elaborate neatness, the trite moralities and ready-made aphorisms of the philanthropists and publicists repeated from page to page with wearying insistence. "I, too, am an American citizen. S.E. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. As for me, give me liberty or give me death." And last of all, a strange intrusion amongst the mild, well-worn phrases, two legends. "I'm Otto, public control of public franchises," and "the P.N.S.W. is an enemy of the state." "I see," commented Presley. "You mean the little tad to understand the situation early." "I told him he was foolish to give that to Sid to copy," said Mrs. Dyke with indulgent remonstrance. "What can she understand of public franchises?" "Never mind," observed Dyke. "She'll remember it when she grows up, and when the seminary people have rubbed her up a bit, and then she'll begin to ask questions and understand. But don't you make any mistake, Mother," he went on, "about the little tad not knowing who her dad's enemies are. What do you think, boys? Listen here. Precious little I've ever told her of the railroad or how I was turned off. But the other day I was working down by the fence next the railroad tracks, and Sid was there. She'd brought her doll rags down, and she was playing house behind a pile of hop poles. Well, along comes a through freight mixed train from Missouri points and a string of empties from New Orleans. And when it had passed, what do you suppose the tad did? She didn't know I was watching her. She goes to the fence and spits a little spit after the caboose, and puts her little head, and if you'll believe me, hisses at the train go by, and never crosses the tracks that she don't spit her little spit on. What do you think of that?" "But I correct her every time," protested Mrs. Dyke seriously. "Where she picked up the trick of hissing, I don't know. No, it's not funny. It seems dreadful to see a little girl who's as sweet and gentle as can be in every other way so venomous. She says the other little girls at school and the boys, too, are all the same way. Oh, dear," she sighed, "why will the general office be so unkind and unjust? Why, I couldn't be happy with all the money in the world if I thought that even one little child hated me. Hated me so that it would spit and hiss at me, and it's not one child, it's all of them, so Sydney says. And think of all the grown people who hate the road, women and men, the whole country, the whole state, thousands and thousands of people. Don't the managers and the directors of the road ever think of that? Don't they ever think of all the hate that surrounds them? everywhere, everywhere, and the good people that just grit their teeth when the name of the road is mentioned. Why do they want to make the people hate them? No, she murmured, the tears starting to her eyes. No, I tell you, Mr. Presley, the men who own the railroad are wicked, bad-hearted men who don't care how much the poor people suffer so long as a road makes its 18 million a year. They don't care whether the people hate them or love them, just so long as they are afraid of them. It's not right, and God will punish them sooner or later. A little after this, the two young men took themselves away, Ike obligingly carrying them in the wagon as far as the gate that opened into the Keensabe ranch. On the way, Presley referred to what Mrs. Ike had said and led Ike himself to speak of the P&SW. Well, Ike said, it's like this, Mr. Presley. I personally haven't got the right to kick. With you wheat-growing people, I guess it's different, but hops, you see, don't count for much in the state. It's such a little business that the road don't want to bother themselves to tax it. It's the wheat growers that the road cinches. The rates on hops are fair, I've got to admit that. I was in Bonneville a while ago to find out. It's 2 cents a pound, and Lord love you, that's reasonable enough to suit any man. No, he concluded, I'm on the way to make money now. The road sacking me as they did was maybe a good thing for me after all. It came just at the right time. I had a bit of money put by, and here was the chance to go into hops, with the certainty that hops would quadruple and quintuple in price inside the year. No, it wasn't my chance, and though they didn't mean it by a long chalk, the railroad people did me a good turn when they gave me my time. And the tat'll enter the seminary next fall. About a quarter of an hour after they had said goodbye to the one-time engineer, Presley and Vanamy, tramping briskly along the road that led northward through Keensabe, arrived at Annixter's ranch house. At once they were aware of a vast and unwonted bustle that revolved about the place. They stopped a few moments looking on, amused and interested in what was going forward. The colossal barn was finished. Its freshly whitewashed sides glared intolerably in the sun, but its interior was as yet innocent of paint, and through the yawning vent of the sliding doors came a delicious odor of new, fresh wood and shavings. A crowd of men, Annixter's farmhands, were swarming all about it. Some were balanced on the topmost rounds of ladders, hanging festoons of Japanese lanterns from tree to tree and all across the front of the barn itself. Mrs. Tree, her daughter Hilma, and other women were inside the barn cutting into long strips, bolt after bolt of red, white, and blue cambric, and directing how these strips should be draped from the ceiling and on the walls. Everywhere resounded the tapping of tack hammers. A farm wagon drove up, loaded to overflowing with evergreens and with great bundles of palm leaves, and these were immediately seized upon and affixed as supplementary decorations to the tricolored cambric upon the inside walls of the barn. 2 of the larger evergreen trees were placed on either side of the barn door, and their tops bent over to form an arch. In the middle of this arch it was proposed to hang a mammoth pasteboard escutcheon with gold letters spelling the word welcome. Piles of chairs rented from IOOF Hall in Bonneville heaped themselves in an apparently hopeless entanglement on the ground, while at the far extremity of the barn a couple of carpenters clattered about the impromptu staging which was to accommodate the band. There was a strenuous gaiety in the air. Everybody was in the best of spirits. Notes of laughter continually interrupted the conversation on every hand. At every moment a group of men involved themselves in uproarious horseplay. They passed oblique jokes behind their hands to each other, grossly veiled double meanings meant for the women, and bellowed with laughter thereat, stamping on the ground. The relations between the sexes grew more intimate, the women and girls pushing the young fellows away from their sides with vigorous thrusts of their elbows. It was passed from group to group that Adela Vaca, a division superintendent's wife, had lost her garter. The daughter of the foreman of the home ranch was kissed behind the door of the dairy house. Annixter, in execrable temper, appeared from time to time hatless, his stiff yellow hair in wild disorder. He hurried between the barn and the ranch house, carrying now a wicker demijohn, now a case of wine, now a basket of lemons and pineapples. Besides general supervision, he had elected to assume the responsibility of composing the punch. Something stiff, by jingo, a punch that would raise you right out of your boots, a regular hair lifter. The harness room of the barn he had set apart for himself and intimates. He had brought a long table down from the house, and upon it had set out boxes of cigars, bottles of whiskey and of beer, and the great china bowls for the punch. It would be no fault of his, he declared, if half the number of his men friends were not uproarious before they left. His barn dance would be the talk of all Tulare County for years to come. For this one day he had resolved to put all thoughts of business out of his head. For the matter of that, things were going well enough. Osterman was back from Los Angeles with a favorable report as to his affair with Disparow and Darrell. There had been another meeting of the committee. Aaron Derrick had attended. Though he had taken no part in the discussion, Annixter was satisfied. The governor had consented to allow Heron to come in if he so desired, and Heron had pledged himself to share 1/6 of the campaign expenses, providing these did not exceed a certain figure. As Annixter came to the door of the barn to shout abuse at the distraught Chinese cook who was cutting up lemons in the kitchen, he caught sight of Presley and Vanamy and hailed them. "Hello, Press," he called. "Come over here and see how she looks." He indicated the barn with a movement of his head. "Well, we're getting ready for you tonight," he went on as the two friends came up. "But how are we going to get it straightened out by 8 o'clock, I don't know. Would you believe that Pip Caraher is short of lemons? At this last minute. And I told him I'd want 3 cases of 'em as much as a month ago, and here, just when I want a good, lively saddle horse to get around on, someone hikes the buckskin out of the corral. Stole her, by jingo. I'll have the law on that thief if it breaks me, and a $60 saddle and headstall gone with her. And only about half the number of jack-o'-lanterns that I ordered have shown up, and not candles enough for those. It's enough to make a dog sick. There's nothing done that you don't do yourself unless you stand over these loafers with a club. I'm sick of the whole business, and I've lost my hat. Wish to God I'd never dreamed of giving this rotten fool dance. Clutter the whole place up with a lot of females. I sure did lose my presence of mind when I got that idea." Then, ignoring the fact that it was he himself who had called the young man to him, he added, "Well, this is my busy day. Sorry I can't stop and talk to you longer." He shouted a last imprecation at the Chinaman and turned back into the barn. Presley and Vanamy went on, but Annixter, as he crossed the floor of the barn, all but collided with Hilma Tree, who came out from one of the stalls, a box of candles in her arms. Gasping out an apology, Annixter re-entered the harness room, closing the door behind him, and forgetting all the responsibility of the moment, lit a cigar and sat down in one of the hired chairs, his hands in his pockets, his feet on the table, frowning thoughtfully through the blue smoke. Annixter was at last driven to confess to himself that he could not get the thought of Hilma Tree out of his mind. Finally, she had got a hold on him. The thing that of all others he most dreaded had happened. A female girl had got a hold on him, and now there was no longer for him any such thing as peace of mind. The idea the young woman was with him continually. He went to bed with it, he got up with it. At every moment of the day he was pestered with it. It interfered with his work, got mixed up in his business. What a miserable confession for a man to make, a fine way to waste his time. Was it possible that only the other day he had stood in front of the music store in Bonneville and seriously considered making Hilma a present of a music box? Even now, the very thought of it made him flush with shame, and this after she had told him plainly that she did not like him. He was running after her, he, Annixter. He ripped out a furious oath, striking the table with his boot heel. Again and again he had resolved to put the whole affair from out of his mind. Once he had been able to do so, but of late it was becoming harder and harder with every successive day. He had only to close his eyes to see her as plain as if she stood before him. He saw her in a glory of sunlight that set a fine tinted luster of pale carnation and gold on the silken sheen of her white skin. Her hair sparkled with it, her thick, strong neck sloping to her shoulders with beautiful full curves seemed to radiate the light. Her eyes brown, wide, innocent in expression, disclosing the full disk of the pupil upon the slightest provocation, flashed in this sunlight like diamonds. Annixter was all bewildered. With the exception of the timid little creature in the glove-cleaning establishment in Sacramento, he had had no acquaintance with any woman. His world was harsh, crude, a world of men only, men who were to be combated, opposed. His hand was against nearly every one of them. Women he distrusted with the instinctive distrust of the overgrown schoolboy. Now at length a young woman had come into his life. Promptly he was struck with discomfiture, annoyed almost beyond endurance, harassed, bedeviled, excited, made angry and exasperated. He was suspicious of the woman, yet desired her, totally ignorant of how to approach her, hating the sex, yet drawn to the individual, confusing the two emotions, sometimes even hating Hilma as a result of this confusion, but at all times disturbed, vexed, irritated beyond the power of expression. At length Annixter cast his cigar from him and plunged again into the work of the day. The afternoon wore to evening, to the accompaniment of wearying and clamorous endeavor. In some unexplained fashion, the labor of putting the great barn in readiness for the dance was accomplished. The last bolt of cambric was hung in place from the rafters. The last evergreen tree was nailed to the joists of the walls. The last lantern hung, the last nail driven into the musician's platform. The sun set. There was a great scurry to have supper and dress. Annixter, last of all the other workers, left the barn in the dusk of twilight. He was alone. He had a saw under one arm, a bag of tools was in his hand. He was in his shirt sleeves and carried his coat over his shoulder. A hammer was thrust into one of his hip pockets. He was in execrable temper. The day's work had fagged him out. He had not been able to find his hat. And the buckskin with $60 worth of saddle gone too, he groaned. Oh, ain't it sweet? At his house, Mrs. Tree had set out a cold supper for him, the inevitable dish of prunes serving as dessert. After supper, Annixter bathed and dressed. He decided at the last moment to wear his usual town-going suit, a sack suit of black made by a Bonneville tailor, but his hat was gone. There were other hats he might have worn, but because this particular one was lost, he fretted about it all through his dressing, and then decided to have one more look around the barn for it. For over a quarter of an hour, he pottered about the barn, going from stall to stall, rummaging the harness room and feed room, all to no purpose. At last he came out again upon the main floor, definitely giving up the search, looking about him to see if everything was in order. The festoons of Japanese lanterns in and around the barn were not yet lighted, but some half-dozen lamps with great tin reflectors that hung against the walls were burning low. A dull half-light pervaded the vast interior, hollow, echoing, leaving the corners and roof thick with impenetrable black shadows. The barn faced the west, and through the open sliding doors was streaming a single bright bar from the afterglow, incongruous and out of all harmony with the dull flare of the kerosene lamps. As Annixter glanced about him, he saw figures step briskly out of the shadows of one corner of the building, pause for the fraction of one instant in the bar of light, then, at sight of him, dart back again. There was a sound of hurried footsteps. Annixter, with recollections of the stolen buckskin in his mind, cried out sharply, "Who's there?" There was no answer. In a second, his pistol was in his hand. "Who's there? Quick, speak up, or I'll shoot." No, don't shoot," cried an answering voice. Oh, be careful, it's I, Hilma Tree." Annixter slid the pistol into his pocket with a great qualm of apprehension. He came forward and met Hilma in the doorway. "Good Lord," he murmured, "that's sure to give me a start. If I had shot—" Hilma stood abashed and confused before him. She was dressed in a white organdie frock of the most rigorous simplicity, and wore neither flower nor ornament. The severity of her dress made her look even larger than usual, and even as it was, her eyes were on a level with Annixter's. There was a certain fascination in the contradiction of stature and character of Hilma. A great girl, half child as yet, but tall as a man for all that. There was a moment's awkward silence. Then Hilma explained. I came back to look for my hat. I thought I left it in here this afternoon." "And I was looking for my hat," cried Annixter. "Funny enough, hey?